So I got cut off from that last video, and I apologize for having to create one new one. But I just want to read through here um, this conflation that Hume thinks we make, and he's actually talking about a kind of mental or a kind of phenomenological mental leap that we make when we kind of trick ourselves. And there's a precise moment when we kind of trick ourselves into going from kind of a succession of thoughts to the identity. And it's so subtle, we're not even aware we do it, but he thinks that is the crucial thing that inevitably, it's not some mistake that we make that we can just avoid, but it's imperceptible. But Hume is trying to describe what that experience of thinking is like that gives rise to the idea of the unitary, identical, simple self. And he talks about it really well here on 527. And I just want to look at what he says. So I'm going to read a rather extended portion here. So in 527, Hume says, he's talking about identity and succession, or identity and relation, the two that we conflate. He says, but though these two ideas, so I'm on 527, first full column there, a few lines down, though these two ideas of identity and a succession of related objects be in themselves perfectly distinct and even contrary, yet it is certain that in our common way of thinking they are generally confounded with one another. That action of the imagination by which we consider the uninterrupted and invariable object, and that by which we reflect on the succession of related objects, are almost the same to the feeling. Nor is there much more effort of thought required in the latter case than in the former. So the relation facilitates so he's talking about the relation of succession here. The relation facilitates the transition of the mind from one object to another and renders its passage as smooth as if it contemplated one continued object. So that's the moment. This resemblance is the cause of the confusion and mistake and makes us substitute the notion of identity instead of that of related objects. However, at one instant, we may consider the related succession as variable or interrupted. We are sure the next to ascribe to it a perfect identity and regard it as invariable and uninterrupted. Our propensity to this mistake is so great from the resemblance above mentioned that we fall into it before we are aware, and though we incessantly correct ourselves by reflection and return to a more accurate method of thinking, we cannot long sustain our philosophy or take off this bias from the imagination. And then a few more lines down, thus we feign, and this is the crucial line, thus we feign the continued existence of the perceptions of our senses to remove the interruption and run into the notion of a soul and self and substance to disguise the variation. But we may further observe that where we do not give rise to such a fiction, our propensity to confound identity with relation is so great that we are apt to imagine something unknown and mysterious connecting the parts besides their relation, and this I take to be the case with regard to the identity we describe to plants and vegetables. So again, it's almost as though you can kind of see him thinking about what Descartes is doing here. Descartes took the stream of thought, thinking. Right, when Descartes says thought exists in the second meditation, he says, aha, I make my discovery, thought exists. It's almost as though thought existing, successive thoughts, the stream of thoughts, the stream of perceptions, the stream of consciousness. Descartes took that and made this jump, this imperceptible leap to say that it was all the same thought, and therefore it gave rise to what he calls a soul, a self, and a substance, thinking substance, thinker and thoughts, as though you can have the thinker without the thoughts. And Hume's claim is you cannot have the thinker without the thoughts. There's no thinking substance. There's just thoughts that give rise to it, right? And so that is the crucial thing. So I read through that there, and I really want you to take a look at it because it's a really fascinating kind of phenomenology of the self that Hume is giving us here, of what actually happens when we engage in this mental introspection and how we make this mistake. And I want to see what kind of what you think of that. Now, because if any of you are aware of a movement in the 20th century known as phenomenology, phenomenology takes as its starting point that thought is always intentional, that it is always about something. Perception is always about something. So it's a unit. It's thought and thinker. As a unit, there's never thought, or there's never thinker without thought. And so that's kind of, I think Hume in some ways is kind of prefiguring what's going on in phenomenology in the 20th century and the late 19th century here. And so anyways, the confounding of identity with relation. That's the mistake that gives rise to thinking that there is a self kind of standing substance that exists apart from the thoughts. That's actually all I'm going to say. Hume will go on in the next pages to try to give you examples of what this looks like and why we do this in order to disprove that. But that's kind of all I'm going to say for today. I hope this made sense, and I will talk to you soon, especially next week when we get to talk about Cont. Be safe, be healthy, and be well.